And we've in particular got a number of key questions that we would like you to look at, but we don't want this to fetter your freedom to provide sort of comments on any aspect of the documents that you see fit. So we're looking at just your general comments, your general feedback, as well as answers, hopefully, to some of the specific questions that we've got. And the idea really of this process is to provide, as I mentioned in my presentation earlier today, is two things really. One is to provide feedback and your inputs into the recommendation. I outlined very broadly what the recommendation question is. Do you think the system that created? Any general comments on the recommendations or the in the future? And then also, just in terms of a project sense, and picking up on this issue we've got of not leaving things to gather dust on shelves, just suggestions on how to take the process forward. What might be the needs in terms of taking the process forward? And like I say, the to have validated the sort of we're not at this stage proposing, for example, that they adopted as the regional protocols for the TheCRFM. In fact, that needs to be set up. And so what we're really asking for is to validate the idea in a more leisurely and longer term process than we have in this workshop. So it's again just sort of validate the concept and the overall approach and recommendation of how to take drafting, for example. We realise that there may be sort of drafting errors. And we'll just sort of disperse to separate parts of the room. Useful as if each group could appoint I'll put this slide back up again in a minute just before we disperse. We need to look at the protocols and we need to look at the legislation. We sort of split that into two groups rather than just look at them together. I suggest we look at one, feedback, and we can have a little breather afterwards, and then we can go back to the groups. We've got quite a long sort of session really to look at these documents. There is also a coffee break scheduled for 3 o'clock. I don't know if we want to change that possibly, but we could sort of use the coffee break as the point to break between the protocols and the legislation, and give everybody a chance just to refresh themselves a little bit. So in fact, actually, probably just looking at the agenda, the coffee break around about 3 o'clock will probably still be about the right time, perhaps about 3:15. That'll give us time to complete discussions on the first session. So the first thing we want to look at is the protocols. Just a quick recap. That the protocols are trying to implement all of these things, particularly the top line, so that we've got a system of steps that processors, operators, facilities need to take to implement these standards and be compliant with EU requirements. Remember that the protocol providing specific direction on the steps to be taken, guaranteeing compliance with the export requirements, and indicating steps for a harmonised approach, consistently with international standards, and capable of being incorporated into enforceable obligations. Now, we don't need to worry too much in our review today whether the particular protocols that we've got to look at guarantee compliance with export requirements. That very much is a sort of detailed level of review that would go into the sort of formal review mechanism that we've proposed in our governance sort of section. And actually, one of the things that actually would be the role of the expert review, and would be the role of the regional mechanism, particularly I imagine CAFSA would take this role, is to have a dialogue with the EU and the US, and in fact get them, you know, even to in effect validate the protocol themselves and say, yeah, we're happy that if these procedures are implemented, it'll satisfy our requirements. So we can get a sort of stamp of approval on these protocols in advance. So we don't need to look at that level of detail today. Obviously that's a much more complicated process, but just bear in mind that these are the sort of objectives that the protocols are designed to achieve. And just to recap a couple of other points from this morning, so we're suggesting that the management of these protocols should be at the regional level. And I think one of the questions that we've mentioned a couple of times, and Mr. Horton mentioned, was about the legal status of these protocols. So in our recommendation at the moment, there's no formal legal status of these protocols once adopted at the regional level. Certainly in the short term, perhaps in the longer term, that's something that could be developed, but the national mechanisms have to incorporate these protocols into national law. And we do that by enabling that concept in primary legislation and in individual cases incorporating the protocols into licenses. But that's not necessarily the approach that needs to be taken. It could be something that's integrated a bit more into TheCRFM legal machinery, for example. Just, I don't know. Obviously, my apologies for this. That you received the protocol somewhat late. They all follow a standard format. Which we sort of